Hello. So I'm Matthew Peterson. I'm in graphic design assistant professor. Let me see if this thing works. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the integration of text and image in media. I got to this through an interest in the science textbook, actually. And I sort of wanted to have a positive impact on science instruction, but I was a graphic designer. So that seemed to be the place that I could do this. So I started to look into this, and of course we know a lot in psychology about text and image, and that we have sort of unique but complementary resources for processing these things, these two different codes. So I started to look at the studies, and there are a lot of great studies. As a graphic designer, I started to notice that a lot of them, by the kind of experimental model, had to really simplify the design to isolate a single image and caption or something like that. And I wanted to start to look at design holistically in the way that designers actually work, so that you could actually make prescriptions that designers can work with. So I started to think about strategy, that there's an implicit strategy anytime somebody designs something based on your assumptions about how text works, how image works, maybe about the production model of a textbook, which is, by the way, they of course typically will start with text and then the images are added later on. And so I started to look at that, and I wanted to think about it in terms of strategy, and I was interested in comprehension and interest level. So what I did is I started to look at design, and I came up with some basic strategies that represent a range of text-image integration. On the left-hand side, you see prose primary, which is what you would actually see in most illustrated books. So there's a central prose column. There's one proper entry point. It has to be read in a certain order, or it doesn't make any sense. Sometimes there are images, but you have to leave the text to go to those images. On the extreme, so that's a serial system. There's a direction to it. On the extreme, you have a parallel system, something where the text is broken down and it lives in a space with imagery, and you can choose to enter at any point you want. You can choose to read things in any order you want. It's much easier to get to information, but it also seems like it might be much more confusing. And then I have a middle point that is about images as entry points into text. So it looks something like this, and I'll go through these one by one. So this is a spread from a textbook that I used in the study. Again, you can see that there are moments of fully integrated media. The diagram on the right-hand side, it has text and image built into it. But it's definitely controlled by this prose column. This middle ground, you still have prose, but now we have 4 or so entry points into the text. Images actually serve in that function. There are more images. And then this is something that is fully integrated. It takes more time to produce it, which I experienced myself when I had to make these things. But you can see that there's a lot of ways to read this, and you can imagine that actually going back to the textbook to try to find information that you encountered before is much more easy to do. For me to do this, of course, it's a process because I had to work from an existing textbook, which was done under a prose primary model. So it was done from a text-first kind of perspective. I had to kind of reverse engineer it and actually take some stuff that was in the code of text and convert it to the code of image. So you can tell somebody that the fish is at the bottom of the lake. You can also show them the fish at the bottom of the lake. So I did multiple tests. I'm not going to ask you to read that screen. And so in terms of comprehension, I had students actually use these textbooks as kind of open book tests. And I had factual and conceptual items for them to complete. And you could kind of say consistently that fully integrated had the highest comprehension scores, but you can see that it's very subtle. In only one of the treatment conditions was there actually a significant difference that said that fully integrated was more comprehensible than prose primary. Situational interest was much more powerful results. So after the test, as a post-test, when I could kind of reveal to the kids what was happening, I cut these spreads up into individual pages, and I showed them the 3 versions. And the first time I asked them which is the most interesting, and the second time I asked them which is the least interesting. And so you see that these are very different. In the prose primary version, the least integration, the scores are very low, so there was very low interest. The higher you go towards integration, the more interest there is. And I was able to sort of separate my estimates for means, and you can kind of see that there is a separation there. So I was able to come to a summary that is only partial, of course, unfortunately. It's that there is some indication that there might be some comprehension benefits from this kind of work, but it's inconclusive, though it was very, very clear that kids at this age were much more interested by more integrated media, which I think is something that is quite obvious, right? You would expect that to be the case. And I will end there.